Hello and welcome to this lab demonstration on configuring an ESXi host. After completing this lab demo, you will be able to integrate an ESXi host with Active Directory so that you can log in as an Active Directory user, and you will be able to enable the vSphere ESXi shell and SSH services on an ESXi host. This lab covers centralized authentication via Active Directory, which makes user management easier in an environment with several ESXi hosts and multiple administrators. Using Active Directory services for authentication is best practice in a production environment. Enabling the ESXi shell and SSH, however, is not recommended, except for troubleshooting scenarios. Since we will use the VMware host client user interface to configure Active Directory integration and enable ESXi shell and SSH services, you should be familiar with the host client graphical user interface. In this lab exercise, we will first add an ESXi host to Active Directory. Then we will log into the ESXi host as an Active Directory user to verify that we can use Active Directory authentication services for login. Finally, we will enable the vSphere ESXi shell and SSH services on the ESXi host. These are common requirements when setting up or troubleshooting an ESXi host, so you want to know how to enable these services. It's time to finish the introduction and get started. I'm sure I provided you enough good reasons to watch the following video on configuring an ESXi host. Now let's get started. In the first task, we will join ESXi host SA ESXi01 to an existing and pre-configured Active Directory server, so that we can benefit from centralized authentication services. By enabling Active Directory-based authentication on our ESXi hosts, we only have to administer the ESXi users once, in Active Directory, rather than setting up all ESXi users on all ESXi hosts. We want to perform the configuration on a standalone ESXi host, SA ESXi01. So the first step is to connect to this host. Then we log in using the locally configured root account. Now we add the host to Active Directory. In the navigator pane under Host, we click Manage. Then we select the Security and Users tab. On the left of the tab, we have to choose Authentication. And then on the right, we can see that Active Directory is currently disabled on this ESXi host. We click Join Domain up here. And now we have to enter the data of the Active Directory that we want to join. We have to provide the directory service domain. In our lab, the domain is vclass.local. Be aware that if you only specify a domain, then the default container is used. Another option is to refer to a specific organizational unit by adding the path to the organizational unit after the domain in a URL type format. Down here, we have to enter the credentials of an existing Active Directory user. This user must have the permissions inside Active Directory to join our server to the domain. We use administrator and the password of this user as it is configured in Active Directory. We did not activate the Use Authentication Proxy checkbox. What is this used for? This is typically used when you provision ESXi hosts using the auto-deploy feature. It allows auto-deployed ESXi hosts to be joined to the domain by a reference host. Another situation where you might want to use an authentication proxy is when you do not want to configure and store the Active Directory credentials on every ESXi host. So if we wanted this ESXi host to use a proxy, we would activate that checkbox. and then refer to a proxy host. That proxy host would be configured without the proxy function, and it would be configured with an Active Directory user. In this lab, we do not want to use an authentication proxy, so we deactivate the checkbox and provide the credentials of the Active Directory user that has the permissions to join our host to the domain, right here on our ESXi host. Now we click Join Domain. We can see a new task in the Recent Task pane. And on the updated screen, we can now see that Active Directory is enabled. Our membership status is OK, and the joined domain is vclass.local. We successfully integrated this ESXi host with Active Directory. In the next task, we want to verify that we can log in as an Active Directory user. First, we will make sure that only one local username, the default user called root, exists on the ESXi host. Then we will log in with a different username called ESXadmin. This user is an Active Directory user, and if our login is successful, we proved that external authentication via Active Directory works. As said, let's first check out what local usernames exist on this ESXi host. We go to Manage, Security and Users, and we click on Users so that we can see the local usernames. And as you can see, there is just a single username, root. Now let's log out and log back in as an Active Directory user instead of using the local root account. We enter ESXadmin for the username and the password of this user as it is configured in Active Directory. Login was successful. You can see that we are logged in as ESXadmin, even though this user doesn't exist on the local host. We were authenticated via Active Directory. The ESXadmin username that we used for login is a member of a domain group in Active Directory, and that group is configured to have full administrative access to all ESXi hosts that joined the domain. As a result, we have full access rights on the ESXi host here. In the next and final task of this lab, we will enable ESXi shell and SSH services on our hosts. While it is best practice to keep these services disabled, you might need to enable them when troubleshooting an issue. Just make sure that you disable them again after you're done. In the Navigator pane, we have to select Manage. Then we click on the Services tab, and then we have to locate the services. We can either search for the name of the service, that would be TSM, which stands for Tech Support Mode in case of the ESXi shell, and TSM SSH in case of the SSH service. Or we could take a look at the description column, where it says ESXi shell and SSH. As you can see, we have to scroll down to locate these items. And here they are. TSM, which is the ESXi shell, and TSM SSH, which is our SSH service. Note that you could also enter a search string on the top right of the list. Let me demonstrate this by searching for TSM. You can see that we only have 2 hits, which are exactly our 2 services, TSM and TSM SSH. The status of both services is stopped. They are disabled. So let's enable them. First we select the TSM service. This is the ESXi shell. We click Start. The service has been started and we are back at the complete list. If you want to use the search again, you first have to cancel the existing search and then retype it. So I'm entering TSM again. I see the list. I can see that the ESXi shell is already running, and now we simply do the same for the SSH service. So I click on TSM SSH and I click Start. We're again taken back to the list. Let me refresh that search again. Now we see these two services and both of them are running. We successfully enabled the ESXi shell and SSH services on the ESXi host. Congratulations! You have completed the Configuring an ESXi Host lab demonstration video. In this lab, we added an ESXi host to Active Directory, we verified Active Directory integration by logging in as an Active Directory user, and we enabled the ESXi shell and SSH services. In the lab exercise, the Active Directory was pre-configured, and we only looked at the ESXi configuration. Don't forget that you have to set up Active Directory in your environment before you try joining an ESXi host to an Active Directory domain. And regarding the ESXi shell and SSH, keep in mind that according to best practices, you should only enable these services during troubleshooting. Thank you for watching this lab demonstration video. I hope the knowledge acquired here will help you with your daily job assignments, and good luck as you continue your journey in VMware world.